Hey everybody, welcome to a new episode of Translating Love with me, Woifi.
And Dani.
Danielle.
Danielle. Wolfgang.
Wolfgang and Danielle. No, Woifi and Dani and Woifi. Doesn't matter. We're back with another episode, and today we're talking about...
What are we talking? Living together.
Living together. About. Exactly. What a boring topic. No. It might be. I don't know.
Maybe.
No, it's not. It's not.
I think it's interesting.
I think it's interesting because let's just dive into it. I never lived with someone else before you.
I had lived with somebody before that I was dating.
Mm-hmm.
So I had that experience already, but I also lived with roommates before that. So
yeah, but roommates is always different. I mean, sure, you share
you
living
have
space.
some of the same difficulties, but living romantically with someone is something that I had already experienced.
Yeah, I did not. I always had the fortune to just go whenever things got heated and and run away from it, basically, and see you when you don't suck anymore. So, yeah, that was interesting going in this relationship by just basically living with each other.
Yeah.
Right from the start.
Well, that's kind of what's unique for our situation is because of the fact that we're from two different countries. It was basically either move here and find an apartment, which I just couldn't afford.
Yeah.
And also, I don't even know if that would have been legal because I didn't technically have a visa yet when I first came here.
It would have been when you have a visa, yeah.
Yeah. Or come here and just do it, bite the bullet, live together.
Yeah.
So the very start of a relationship, essentially, living together. That's what we're here to discuss.
Right. So I think naturally when you go into a new relationship is that you get to know each other and you spend more time with each other. And essentially at some point you say, hey, maybe we should take it to the next step and move in. You can move in with me or the other way, or we look for a new apartment because we want a bigger space. And that happens sometimes after a year, sometimes after 4 or 5 years, or even longer.
And sometimes even sooner.
Yeah. So I think the unique situation which we had was pretty fast.
Mm-hmm.
Especially for me because I didn't really think about it. So I was like, yeah, sure, let's do it. But after some time, there were I would say a lot of difficulties for me to adjust and also to give space and to share space and to sacrifice not only space, but also time or I wouldn't even say time, but more things that you would normally do when you're alone, like playing games, reading when you feel like it, or just going out alone, or hanging out with a friend. Stuff you would normally do because you don't have to ask someone or you don't have to go to someone and say like, hey, that's going to happen tonight, or maybe you want to do that tonight. You just do it. And yeah, that was a big adjustment.
Yeah. And for me, the biggest adjustment, I mean, sure, we had our difficulties when we moved in together. All of your standard stuff, which we'll also get into. But for me, I think the biggest thing was that I had just moved across the country. And not across the country, I moved across an ocean.
Yeah, right. A little further than the country.
A little further. And I basically packed up my life into 2 suitcases, if you can believe it. So I had an apartment in Portland, and I packed my stuff up in 2 suitcases. Everything else got donated. And so I'm basically coming here with nothing. I don't really speak the language. And so it's a very lonely feeling to move to a new country where all of that is the case. And so then to live with somebody for the first time, that was my biggest struggle because I sacrificed so much to come here. And fairly shortly after we started having, the standard problems, then I think it was hard for me because I felt like kind of alone
Yeah.
a lot of the time.
I mean, there are a lot of different aspects to the whole story.
Sure.
Because not only you don't have any close friends or family by, you can't just go somewhere and stay there.
Yeah.
You had no car, so you weren't really able to get around that fast or easy.
And also, his car is a stick shift, and it wasn't until recently that I learned how to drive stick shift.
Yeah.
And so I could only drive automatic, and that's not a huge thing here.
And then
So
another
I couldn't
thing,
just leave and go somewhere.
right? And then another thing, which was something we didn't think about it because you just don't coming into a new relationship, and also never been with someone who doesn't speak your language or is not like native, is the language barrier. And by just having all those simple, small stuff that you already usually have with someone living together the first time, like seeing all the quirky things or they leaving things lying around that you usually don't do, stuff like that, or they don't make the bed, but you make it, or the other way around, stuff like that.
Or just, things that they do differently than you're used to.
And then on top, you have the other mentioned problems like the language barrier and stuff. It's not super easy.
Yeah, it's a lot at one time.
It's a lot. And we, like the first half year, we fought a lot. Like we had so many arguments, over the most pointless stuff.
And stupid things.
Yeah.
I probably couldn't even remember things we argued about, honestly.
I remember some arguments, not because of what we argued, but more so how big they got.
Yeah.
But everything else, it's like we argued about the most stupid stuff.
And a lot of the time, from what I remember, it wasn't really about stuff like that related to living together.
No.
It was just we were both frustrated in the situations that we were in because we really wanted it to work, but because of the stuff that was hard for me and then the stuff that was hard for him, and not really talking about that with each other, which I think was another kind of mistake that we made. We didn't really openly talk about that stuff so much until later. And I think we were just fighting because we were frustrated. And so one little thing turned into this massive thing where it was just, it blew up. All the time blew up.
Yeah. And I mean, a big thing also is... for me, at least, because she basically invaded my life, more or less. Not not in a negative way, but I didn't move across the ocean and invaded your life. I didn't invade.
See that? Well, that's a good example of the language barrier because we wouldn't use the word invade. It's basically negative.
Yeah, I mean, you can use it in a negative way in German too. But
I came into his world instead of him coming into mine.
That's what I mean, and I think the people got it.
Invaded.
But so she was all of a sudden here, and since she doesn't know anyone here, so I had to bring her. I mean, obviously bring her along anyways. But we shared a lot of time together. We did essentially everything together. So also there was no real like me time, and there was no it was like full on 100%. Being together from the first day, which was fine, and I loved it. I loved every second, and I don't regret anything. But I think that was also a big point for me to sometimes say, hey, I need a little time. And looking back at the whole thing, I think we could have avoided a lot of like pointless arguments by just me saying, hey, I'm going to watch a movie tonight alone. Or I'm going to just spend time alone tonight playing games, or maybe I'm getting a drink with a friend tonight. Stuff like that. So I could just let go of all that pointless stuff that is growing, kind of, but more so because you just spend every minute with the person you love and you want to make it work. But then rather just like letting go of it, of the whole stuff that's growing. It's just, I don't know. It was a weird situation.
Well, and I think for you too, a big part was that you felt you had to like take care of me in some ways.
I mean, sure, yeah.
The thing is, I would have been the same had the situation been flipped. If you came to the US, you didn't know anybody. If you didn't speak the language very well, and you couldn't drive.
Even with the language thing, I think I would have needed that time, at least for some time, because I
Sure.
don't know anyone. I basically would have relied to you that you bring me along, introduce me to people, or showed me some places where I can go alone as well and stuff like that. So yeah,
But
sure.
I think that it was hard for you because you had this sense of if you wanted to go out and do something, you would feel guilty for doing it because then what do I do in that time?
Yeah, sure.
And so I totally understand that. And for me, on the opposite side, it was not that I would be, I mean, in some ways in the beginning, I do think I was a little resentful when you would take time on your own, but that was only because I felt kind of lonely there and I didn't know anybody and I didn't have the option to just go out and go do something. No, but even taking the bus for me was at that time a horrific experience, just asking for a ticket for where I had to go.
Yeah, sure.
Because just asking alone is something my German was not good enough to even do that. And so, yeah, I think for me it was slightly resentful. I don't know if that's really the right word, but I felt kind of alone. And so I would get a little upset if you went and did something without me.
I felt that.
And I never wanted to make you feel that way, but that's how I felt inside. And I don't know that I ever actually said that to you. I don't think I ever said, you can't do that because it makes me feel like shit.
I mean, I felt that because that's why I felt bad for saying, hey, I want to meet a friend tonight alone, or spend time with my friend alone or whatever, or even play a game tonight, spend the night playing games or whatever. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that was the hardest for me. Just not because I don't want to come off like I don't let people I'm with do have like time for themselves, but it was just a different, it was kind of a scary time for me to do all of that in such a short time, to pack up everything I have, move here with no real like knowledge of where I was going, and or also, no knowledge of the language and what I'm going to do, how long I can stay there. It was all a lot. And to meet his family and all of that, it was just... and not know anybody here. It was really a difficult time.
Thinking back at the first year living together, I don't really know how we managed to get better at the whole thing. I mean, sure, we got used to each other. We tried to make space. We tried to be more aware of the other person's feelings and their space and what they needed. But I couldn't say why we are better now compared to why we weren't.
I mean, on one side of it, this was a while after I'd been here. This was after the second year, but I started studying here. And so my German got better. And even before that, my German got better. And so I think
I'm sure you were working.
As my German was getting better, I was getting more confident. And so then I was more confident, hey, I can actually talk to this person a little bit, or I can actually go somewhere and order coffee, or go somewhere and, I can get on the bus and I can go to Linz and, bounce around the town a little bit. And I wasn't scared as much to do those things anymore. So I think that's part of it. I think the other part of it is that, you get used to each other in a relationship, and over time, you probably stopped feeling less guilty. And I also I didn't want you to feel guilty, so I remember a couple times saying, like, you should go do that. You should go do stuff more with friends, because you had told me at some point that you felt guilty. Eventually, you told me that you felt guilty about doing those things, and I didn't like that because I didn't want you to feel that. So... yeah. I mean, I don't know. It's just, I think, one of those things that kind of, if you put in the work, it naturally happens.
Yeah. But yeah, it was a pretty hard learning curve for me to share all my stuff. Not in the sense that I want to share it and I don't want to come like around as greedy or something. I'm not. And I like to share things, obviously, but it's more like you don't just share like a bathroom. You share everything, essentially. And since our living space is, it's big, it's really nice. I don't want to complain, but there were still some restrictions and still some like things that we couldn't do or we can't do. And at that point, we still had to be aware of my sister. and stuff like that. So there were a lot of things that I don't know, played into the whole thing, kind of. And it wasn't really hard. It wasn't really easy for me to get used. It took me a while to get used to the whole living together thing because I've never experienced it. And for me, was also and still is a big part of like when we fight and argue. That my nature, that's how I basically managed it, is that I basically stepped away from it for a while and then came back to it. And most of the time, it was pointless and stupid, and it resolved pretty quickly. But living together, that's also not easy all the time, because you either can't just go right now, or you would need to drive somewhere, or even go outside and walk. And so there are a lot of things that it's not that easy to do. And also, I mean, we have different fighting styles, and at some point we'll probably talk about it.
For me, I'm more I need to resolve this as soon as possible person, because I hate how it feels and it affects my entire day. If we argue and he needs to have his time, I've gotten a lot better at respecting the fact that he needs time. But until we come back together and talk, I'm pretty miserable. I can do other things and go through the day, but in my head, I'm totally miserable.
Yeah, and I'm basically the opposite, where I can just prioritize and say, okay, I have a job to do, or I have studying or whatever to do. I can just do that and come back to the whole thing later. And also in a more clearer and wider perspective way, where I see, okay, I did things that weren't okay, or said things that weren't okay, and I can be more honest about the whole thing when there's a little time passed. And so that was a big thing for me to also realize that I needed that, because I think that was also a big reason why we fought a lot. Because we had no option I had no option to just go away, because you, again, I use the word invaded my living space. And we shared that living space. And so I couldn't just go home because I was home with you. And that was something I had to adjust.
Yeah, but I also had to adjust that. And on my side of it, it was, I mean, you still could get in the car and go drive somewhere. Or, you know, you could say, hey, I need to get away from this, so I'm going to go see a movie with a friend or something.
Yeah.
I was stuck here.
No, sure.
And so that also was like, I felt very confined. And that's, I think, a big part of why I feel it was so necessary, and that probably affects me today still, why I feel it's so necessary to resolve things so quickly. Because at the time I felt so trapped, and I felt, okay, there's nowhere else to go. I don't want to sit in this house feeling like this. Wouldn't it be better if we just resolve this and then can go about our days?
Yeah.
And then it's fine. And I think I carried that with me, because thinking back to my other relationships, if we fought, I was perfectly fine with not speaking to that person for days if it was necessary. Because I also was like you, where I needed space. I needed to get away from it. But when I came here, I think that's why that it changed for me that way.
Yeah, I don't know. I think there are a lot of factors who are responsible for the whole thing. But yeah, I mean, I think overall living together, like at that early stage, I don't know, made us or brought us closer together somehow. I think so.
I think so too.
And we had to deal with a lot of stuff that couples don't have to deal in like an early stage of relationship. Much sooner, which also kind of, I don't know, we basically got over some really, I don't know, some dumb stuff essentially that every couple has to deal with at some point, pretty fast, or not pretty fast, but sooner than later, thankfully.
But also more complicated things, I think we kind of addressed fairly early on.
Yeah, and also I think we're still working on it, and it's a lot is on me, but being honest, being open with each other, and just discussing things that you feel or that you might need from the other person is also a big part of the whole thing. And I mean, I'm still trying to do that more and it's not easy for me, but I think we got much better with that.
I think so too.
And I think that's also the reason why we can do like this podcast, because otherwise we would lie to each other the whole time. I love you so much.
That's nice.
No, but you know what I mean.
I know what you mean. So we also kind of ran into the problem of spending a little too much time together, which I think is a common problem with anybody who moves in together for the first time.
Yeah.
Because you see each other more than you're used to. And that can be a little, it's nice at first, but then it gets a little, okay, I see you all the time. And in my case, I wasn't working yet. I was trying to figure out how I can get a visa to actually continue to stay here and then to work here.
And I was basically studying at home most of the time.
Yeah, you were studying. So he would go to class, but the classes weren't super long.
No.
And so he'd come home and then he'd be there almost the whole day.
Yeah.
So we're both home the whole day and basically spending time together the whole day.
Yeah.
And that gets to be a lot.
Yeah.
As much as you love somebody, you can't spend 24 hours a day with them. It's just...
No. And the best times we had in that complicated phase of the relationship were when we both were occupied with work or whatever we were doing. And we had basically a day full of tasks. So we wouldn't run into each other, or we wouldn't even see each other the whole day. And then at night or in the afternoon, we saw each other. That was the best. Those were the best days, I think.
I wouldn't say those are the best days, but in terms of
like
the dynamic of our relationship,
yeah.
It got a lot better once we each had things to do.
Yeah.
So once I was actually working, once I got a visa and I was gone for half the day and then I came home, I think we then appreciated the time that we had together a lot more than, before, where you kind of don't appreciate it as much because you're constantly around each other.
Yeah, and it's also okay to feel sometimes like, okay, I just want to be alone right now. I just want to do something alone. I just want her or him to be gone for a while, which is also something that you can ask for in a nice way. And then also like in an understanding way that you don't hurt their feelings, obviously. Yeah. But
that's also something we had to learn.
Yeah.
Because
I mean, I'm still learning that.
He's still learning that. He's a kind of blunt person, which I love about him, because I think it's a really beneficial thing in certain situations. But in other situations where it's like he needs time, or if we're arguing and he needs a few hours to get away from it, he more tends to say things in a harsher way or in a blunt way, or I can't do this right now, or, where it sounds angry. Or earlier on in the relationship when he wanted to take some time to, like, if he wanted to go see a friend or if he just needed time for himself, it would be more, I'm doing this alone tonight, which comes out kind of harsh.
Yeah, I don't know, maybe.
I mean, you don't see it that way. But if someone comes in the room and says, I'm watching a movie alone tonight,
I say, okay, have fun.
It kind of, to me, that comes off as, okay, they are mad at me because they don't want to spend time with me. Otherwise, they would have said, do you mind if I do this?
No, that's also something I had to adjust to.
Yeah.
Because in my opinion, it's just, okay, let's do that, do whatever you want. It's fine to me or with me, yeah. But
I'm also a little bit of a sensitive person, and I
just want to say that, yeah.
I feel things a lot differently, and I feel emotions really strongly because I'm a really empathetic person, and I think that comes into play. But it also goes with the language barrier thing, because it could be that you say something in German,
and German is already a really harsh language.
It's not super harsh. That's a little bit of a stereotype.
It's a stereotype, yeah.
But in German, it would sound like, if you translate it one-to-one from English or from German to English, it would probably come out exactly how he says it.
Yeah.
And in English, we wouldn't say it like that. We would ask the other person if they mind.
Yeah.
And he, I think at the beginning, you saw it as more of like, I don't have to ask permission to do this.
And I mean, it's still sometimes like that. I still feel sometimes like I have to ask for permission.
But when we say that in English, we're not really asking for permission. It's more you're showing consideration.
Someone should have told me that.
I did tell you that.
I don't remember you telling me that. Someone just should have told me that, because then I would have known it.
It's just...
Okay, I'm asking, but I'm not really asking.
You're not really asking.
Isn't that typical, like, I don't want to hurt their feelings, but I'm obviously doing whatever I want anyways.
Nah, I mean, sure, in some ways it could be, but it's more, it shows consideration. And you can phrase it differently. You don't have to say, can I do this? You can say, do you mind if I did this? Or would you mind if I did this?
Sure. But it's a little hypocritical to me, but I totally get the gesture or the meaning of it. Sure.
And I mean, you can phrase it any way you want. You don't have to phrase it as a question. You can say something like, I'm going to do this. I guess there still is a question. Would you mind if I did it?
Yeah.
But it's really more to show consideration for the other person.
Yeah.
But I think that's something we struggled with.
Yeah.
But that's probably going to come up later when we talk about the language. We'll have an episode on language barriers and
we'll go more into that.
Into detail.
Yeah. But I think the whole living together situation is pretty. It was pretty interesting to me, moving in with someone right at the start of a relationship, because you get to see all the stuff you don't normally see.
Mm-hmm.
And you are much closer right from the start. And you also encounter the typical peeing and pooping problems. Like, stuff like that you don't usually, or you try to avoid at the beginning of a relationship because it's like a really intimate thing. And of course, nobody pees and poops in front of a person. I mean, we don't do that, but still.
I mean, you pee in front of me.
Yeah, but not the other stuff. But still, it's like you have all those things that you usually don't come across when you are with someone for the first few months.
Yeah.
And it was just really interesting to get to see that side of a relationship because I've never been there.
Yeah.
And I've always moved basically like in my previous relationships, I moved from her house to my house and back and forth. I stayed there a night or 2 nights and then I came back and stuff. And that's how we did it. And it was fine for me because I had my space, she had her space. And in my space, I was able to do whatever I wanted to do. And I had not to ask or...
Mm-hmm.
or
but that also is different because you didn't see each other all the time.
No,
you
sure.
weren't living together and sharing that space.
No, sure.
Whereas, because if you had just seen her, like you said, on the weekends with one of your girlfriends, you just saw her on the weekends.
Yeah.
And so you had the rest of the week, your evenings to do whatever you want, or some days you could play as long as you want. So you had all of that freedom. And so I think that was also then why it was so hard for you, because all of a sudden that's gone, or you feel like it's gone.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And that was a big sacrifice for me to say, okay, I basically can do whatever I want at any time because you would not say no. But obviously you want to spend time with the person, and obviously I don't want to leave you alone all the time.
And I also want to have the feeling that he wants to spend time with me. So and vice versa, I'm sure you want, at least I hope, that would want to feel like I want to spend time with you. So if you ask for those things too often, then it feels like, okay, this person doesn't want to spend time with me at all.
Yeah. And then we're back at the problem of asking, because that's still something I'm struggling with sometimes. Yeah. Because sometimes I am in a mood or something, and I realize at a later point that I should have just asked for some time, because that's exactly what I would have needed at that point. And that's also something I'm trying to be more aware of, that I see, okay, maybe I just need some time with a friend, or just some game time alone, or maybe a movie alone even, to have some me time. That's sometimes really good, and you should really take that.
Yeah, it's super important, and I think I didn't do that so well at the start of our relationship, where I took time for myself, because, again, going back to the whole feeling kind of lonely, and so I was like, I don't want to take any more time by myself because I have too much time with myself.
Yeah.
And so I think whenever he had time, I was like, I want to spend it with you, because I was already so lonely.
Yeah.
So I didn't really take enough time for myself to do something for myself that I wanted to do, or do things that made me feel good.
Yeah, we basically had opposite situations, where you had more time for yourself and I had almost no time for myself. But I think we managed it pretty well, even though we had some nasty fights.
Yeah.
Looking back. But yeah, living together is fun, but what is your dad saying? Ultimately, the proof if someone...
It's the test of your relationship. Yeah. It is like the test. My dad always says that moving in with somebody is the ultimate test for if your relationship is going to work.
Right. And
And I think that's totally true.
I think that's true to an extent. And also more so if you move in at an earlier stage where you don't know everything about the person yet. Because that's like this massive shock or like massive it's a test. It's a test to the relationship.
But on the other side, I mean, I was the first person I was dating that I moved in with. We were dating for 3 years before we moved in together. 4 years before we moved in together. And we still had very similar problems.
No, sure. I'm not saying that. But I think
not exactly the same because circumstances are obviously different.
But also after 3 or 4 years, you know that person pretty well already. You've seen things.
You do, but you don't know how they are at home necessarily.
No, that's true.
You don't know how they clean things. You don't know how they take care of themselves or, things like that. That's stuff that is like behind the scenes,
How to take care of yourself. That sounds funny. Like how they clean themselves, if they properly clean themselves, if you have to.
I mean, that can be an issue.
If you have to teach them how to clean themselves because they don't know it.
But that's something that comes up in those situations.
Yeah, sure.
Because if you don't see that person all the time, maybe they only are very clean and, groomed when they come to see you.
Yeah, sure. Or even not. Maybe they just basically shower once a week exactly before they see you.
Yeah.
And then that's it for the rest of the week. Yeah, I think we're at the end.
Yeah.
I think that was a fun episode.
I hope so.
Yeah. So please let us know if you have any feedback or like if you like it or if you don't like it, if you have suggestions for us, what we could do better.
If you have things like topics that you would be interested in our take on, or if you have questions. If we get enough questions, maybe we could answer some questions while we're doing the podcast.
Yeah, exactly. There's a fun thing actually on our Anchor page. Anchor is hosting our podcast. You can basically just send us a recorded question and we can play that question in our podcast and then answer it. So if you want to do that, feel free to do it.
That's pretty neat.
Yeah. So thank you for listening.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.